Former U.S. President Donald Trump faces a possible third indictment, this time on allegations he tried to overturn the 2020 election. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. It could happen any day now. A federal indictment of Donald Trump from the special counsel looking into allegations he sought to overturn the 2020 election. The charges and pending trials are stacking up as the next presidential election cycle gets underway, leaving the country with one eye on the ballot box and the other on a courtroom, and a new threat to impeach President Joe Biden over bribery allegations. CGTN's Jim Spellman has more in this report.
Much of official Washington has been watching closely for the expected indictment of former U.S. President Donald Trump on charges related to allegations he tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Those charges could come at any time. Meanwhile, the former president faces a series of other legal challenges. On the campaign trail, former U.S. President Donald Trump downplays his legal troubles.
Well, that's why every time I get a subpoena, you know, my polls go up, I get more and more subpoenas. Report to a grand jury.
But his legal problems are real, serious, and mounting. In Florida, the judge in a federal case that accuses Trump of mishandling classified documents has set a trial date for May of 2024, when Trump will be competing in the Republican primary elections.
What we know is if Donald Trump winds up clinching the nomination by May of 2024, then our candidate for president in our party will be sitting in a courtroom in Florida for weeks, being accused of crimes that could expose him to 30 years in prison.
Trump had hoped to push the trial past next November's presidential election, when Trump could be running against current President Joe Biden. In New York, Trump has sought to have a criminal case against him involving hush money payouts to a porn star moved to a different location in hopes of finding a more favorable jury pool. A judge rejected that motion, and the trial is slated to begin next March in Manhattan. Also in New York, a judge denied Trump's bid for a new trial or a reduction in penalty in a civil case that found Trump sexually assaulted a woman in the 1990s and later defamed the victim by denying the assault. A jury has ordered Trump to pay the victim $5 million. In Georgia, a grand jury has been sworn in to hear evidence into allegations Trump unlawfully tried to overturn the 2020 election that he lost to Biden. The Georgia Supreme Court rejected a bid by Trump to block another grand jury report that recommended criminal charges against the former president. Trump denies wrongdoing in all the cases. He claims the investigations are politically driven.
Well, never happened in our country called weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. We've never had anything like this.
Democrats, including those on the committee that examined the January 6th, 2021 assault on the U.S. Capitol, say criminal charges are fair and warranted.
We sent over evidence, we thought, supporting at least 4 different criminal charges against Donald Trump. So the January 6th committee, the bipartisan January 6th committee, committed itself to the idea that there were crimes committed.
If, as expected, Donald Trump becomes the Republican nominee, it will be unprecedented. No major candidate has ever faced such serious legal jeopardy during a presidential election. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. Joseph Williams served as a senior editor with U.S. News and World Report. Also with us, Douglas Sloan. He's a political analyst and principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. And Gene Rossi is a former assistant U.S. attorney. He spent nearly 3 decades with the Justice Department. Thank you to everyone for being with us. Gene, great to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
In the studio. So President Trump is expected to be indicted for a third time, this time over the January 6th protests, as well as efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Right.
When we look at this third time that he might be indicted, what's at the core of these charges?
Well, I got to tell you, in February and March of this year, I represented an oath keeper. I called him a minnow. He was 21 years old. He was found guilty by a jury. I'm very familiar with the evidence that goes all the way up to Donald Trump. I think this indictment, if it is returned by the grand jury, is probably his most serious charge. I would call it the 4th indictment. I don't think this indictment will be returned until probably mid-August. I think Jack Smith is going to wait for the Georgia prosecutor to bring her indictment. So this would be the fourth, sort of the coup de grace. But I think this last indictment, if it is the last indictment, this one is probably the most serious.
And when we look at these investigations, I mean, these are pretty intensive, exhaustive investigations into the former president. How would you compare the investigations into President Trump to those into President Biden? I mean, he's facing bribery allegations. There's been whistleblowers that have been testifying in Congress as well. He also took documents away to his home at one time. What do you make of the two ways in which they're being seen?
Let me focus on the documents case. The difference between Mike Pence and Joe Biden and their document case, if you will, is that they found the documents and then contacted the archives folks and said, here they are, take them back. We made a mistake. And you can say that it was reckless, it was willful disregard, you could say that. What makes it different than President Trump is the archives folks are trying to negotiate with President Trump for well over a year. Then the Department of Justice got a referral, and then grand jury subpoenas went out. And then Donald Trump arguably, allegedly, defied a grand jury subpoena, and that's where obstruction of justice kicked in, false statements, and his aide, Walter Noddick, is an alleged conspirator. That takes it to a different level if you're a prosecutor, and I did that for 30 years.
What about the other investigation into President Biden, the fact that there's allegations that he took bribes?
If there's evidence that the former president, vice president, and the current president received money in exchange for a favor, that, I don't care who you are as a prosecutor, RD or an independent, you have to investigate that. From what I know now, there's a lot of smoke. Some of the witnesses are going south. There's a lot of speculation. So we'll see where that plays.
Okay. Adolfo Franco, the judge in the classified documents case, her name is Eileen Cannon. She set that trial date for May 20th, and of course that's going to be right in the middle of the election campaign for the 2024 election. If Trump is the Republican nominee, and if we look at the polls right now, he is by far the Republican nominee, could it hurt his chances, or could he find a legal case to make saying that, look, he's campaigning for the presidential election and that this case should be postponed?
Well, you know, in other programs here, this excellent judge was referred to as a lightweight by other guests. This is an excellent decision. It split the difference. So the viewers know the government wanted to begin the trial almost immediately, and President Trump wanted to postpone it after the election. She split it down the middle. But it was an important middle for this reason. This jury selection, based on her trial date in late May, actually, wouldn't even begin until the last week of May, jury selection. By May, it's quite possible that President Trump will either be the de facto nominee, as the clip here from Mr. Christie indicated, if he wins all the Super Tuesday primaries or sweeps most of the states there, and he would just be on the road to becoming the presidential nominee. If that is the case, it is highly unlikely the trial would move forward. You have to keep in mind, as your report presented to the viewers earlier, President Trump is facing 3, 4, 5, I think 6 total types of litigation. So his dance card is quite full, and he is running for president. This idea that every American should be treated the same is true, but he's not every American, just as the president is not, the current president is not just like any other American. He's running for president of the United States, and he is a leader of the opposition. And in fact, that if that is the case in May, the trial will likely not take place in May, but will be postponed, and postponed potentially till after the election. If he stumbles and he is not the nominee, then it's a completely different story, and probably the trial will move forward. So that's why I think the decision was a good one. It's really a placeholder in many ways, depending on how well he does in the primaries. I do have to take exception with what my friend Gene said. Comparing the documents are completely different because President Trump wasn't cooperating and President Biden wasn't. President Biden had no legal right to have documents that he took when he was a senator and vice president. This is a civil statute that governs the Presidential Records Act, and they've, of course, the typical Gene being a good prosecutor, everything's conspiracy when the government wants to get its way, it just charges conspiracy. But there's a huge difference between a Senator Biden and a Vice President Biden taking documents he never had a right to in the first instance, and President Trump, who arguably has a right to those documents or they were declassified. That's to be litigated. So they are completely different scenarios. And they weren't just found, Gene. This emerged after the Mar-a-Lago incident. So therefore, there was a cleanup. President Biden wasn't coming clean. He's held these documents for decades. So this is what's alarming, and this is, again, President Trump's point. There is a weaponization of the justice system. There's a slow walking. I'm glad we're finally talking about the Biden corruption, the Biden family, and Hunter Biden. And the significant testimony that's taking place in Congress about the difference in treatment by prosecutors of evidence as presented by career Democrat investigators.
Right. Gene, very quick response from you that this is, Adolfo makes a point, a civil case, A, and B, what about President Trump's argument that he's the president, or he was the president, and that he could declassify those documents?
Well, Adolfo and I have been agreeing too much lately, so I'm glad we're now disagreeing. And he's a dear friend. I hope I get to meet him in person. But he's wrong. He's dead wrong. If you're a prosecutor, you have to prove intent. And when Joe Biden and Mike Pence had documents, you have to prove that they willfully withheld them. And there's scant evidence that President Biden withheld them. With President Trump, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. When they served the grand jury subpoena on him and his attorneys, there's allegations that President Trump took action to obstruct the grand jury subpoena, cause people to do things. That takes it to another level. That makes the big difference.
Okay, let's go to Douglas Sloan.
I have to correct something very, very quickly. I know this is the other guest to speak.
Yeah.
The willful intent is absolutely right. Gene's absolutely right on willful intent. That's to be decided in the Trump case, whether there was willful intent or not. I don't think there was, but that's to be litigated. The difference is this. When you're a senator, unless you steal the documents, and there are plenty of cases, Gene, that have been decided when officials took documents for which they were not entitled to ever have. That doesn't go to willful intent. He violated the law by having those documents, frankly, taking documents he should never have taken from a SCIF, which is a secure location.
All right, I want to move on to the politics of all of this. Douglas Sloan, I mean, despite facing all these multiple indictments, there was a Harvard-Harris poll that shows that former President Trump will defeat President Biden by a margin of 45 to 40, with 16% of voters undecided. And that poll also showed that nearly 70% of American voters feel President Biden is too old to be running for president again. And I should also add that 2/3 of voters who were surveyed in this poll also said that neither candidate should be running for president. But when we look at President Biden and what this poll is telling us, is he becoming a bit of a liability for the Democratic Party?
No, I wouldn't say that. One of the strengths that Biden has in this election is incumbency, and he's already beaten Trump at the polls, and things have done nothing but get worse for Trump since then. I understand that within the Republican Party and within the Republican electorate, all of these indictments strengthen their resolve to back their candidate. However, Trump can't win with just Republican votes. He needs independents and moderate Democrats. And I will tell you now that with all of these looming indictments and the indictments that have already come down and the looming conviction and everything that's going on with Trump, there is no way that he is going to increase the number of independents and moderate Democrats that are going to vote for. So we're going to see a repeat of what happened in 2020, even perhaps more so. I understand that Joe Biden is old, but Trump is old also. We're not talking about young 45 or 50-year-old Donald Trump. Yeah. Donald Trump is only about 3 or 4 years younger than Joe Biden. So that's not much. That's negligible. So I fully expect that this is a head-to-head election, Donald Trump against Joe Biden, that Joe Biden will emerge victorious again.
Joseph Williams, apart from the two parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, there are now additional contenders for president in that 2024 race, the strongest of whom at this stage of the additional contenders appears to be the activist and academic Cornel West, who will represent the Green Party. What will West's candidacy do to what has traditionally been a two-party race?
I think what he'll do is focus on issues or try to direct some attention to issues that don't get addressed by either of the two major party nominees. I think that in his heart of hearts, Cornel West probably understands that he is not going to be president. He probably understands that a lot of people will vote for him out of frustration with the two parties and out of a support for him talking about inequality, talking about racial issues, talking about problems in America that don't seem to get a lot of traction with the two major parties. Whether or not he's got enough strength to be a spoiler remains to be seen. He's not really polling very well to date, probably right around 1-2%, give or take. That may tick up as the campaign wears on. It may tick up after some primaries come and go, but Green Party candidates, third party libertarians, they traditionally don't do very well at all. That track record has got to be on his mind. What they do have going for them is the possibility of spoiler. I don't know if Cornel West is strong enough to be a spoiler in this particular election, or if the issues that he wants to raise will resonate with enough people that he can credibly be considered a spoiler in a three-party race. But I do know that it's very important for him to be there. I think a lot of his supporters agree with that. And I think he's probably looking to take up the mantle that Bernie Sanders did in 2016 and in 2020.
But Joseph, you don't really have to do well in the election as a candidate, a third-party candidate, as you called it. All you have to do is take away votes in key states.
You do, but I think that Cornel West, doesn't necessarily have the name recognition. I don't know if he's got the money. And I'm fairly sure that his media presence is not going to get very much larger than it is right now. I would suspect that it's probably going to stay pretty much level set. The potential is there. Anybody who says they know what's going to happen probably is not telling the truth to themselves or to you. So I think that the possibility is there. Whether or not it will actually happen, I have a hard time seeing it right now.
Okay. Douglas Sloan, Democrats have called Cornel West a spoiler, a description which he firmly rejects, pointing to the fact that on core issues like, and he's mentioned this, he's talked about militarism, issues of war, mass incarceration, neoliberal economic policies. The two parties are not very different. West says what he wants to do is address issues that preoccupy the poor people, working class people, whom he says are being ignored by the two main parties. Does he have a point there?
He absolutely does have a point. He will, like Joseph said, bring attention to many issues that are glossed over by the two major parties that need to be discussed, about endemic poverty in this country, with homelessness, about the huge pay gap between the millionaires and the owners and the regular working class citizens, about the disparities, the racial, ethnic disparities in this country. So he'll bring all that up and make them discussion points. But the bottom line is this someone that can raise enough money to become a contender or a player in a national stage? And does he have the gravitas? Is this someone that will inspire people and generate interest for people to his campaign? And I just don't see Cornel West doing that. He is an academic. He's a sharp guy. But this isn't someone that is very enigmatic or someone that is going to draw a lot of attention to him.
But if I may quickly, Douglas is a friend of mine. I do know him personally, and he's a great Democrat spinner. But the 2000 election was decided by 930 votes in one state. So Cornel West, forget about him being the nominee or being on all the state ballots. All he needs to do, and when Joseph says 1 or 2%, that's huge in a close election, and spread out in key states. A few hundred votes, look at 2000, can decide the election. So it's a significant problem for the Democrats. But I will say this to my friend Douglas, that poll that the Heat announced is a poll of all Americans, not just Republicans, that show President Trump winning over Joe Biden. So I wouldn't be so sure about this fairness issue being limited to Republicans. I think it's appealing to a lot of independents. And lastly, old versus old. Age is just a number. All you need to look at is Joe Biden physically and cognitively. Notice his new stares for Air Force One and President Trump's energy and intellect. There is just no comparison. And the American people, despite the media's efforts to cover it up, see it clearly. The guy is, for 80, he's 90. Yeah. And President Trump is a youthful 77.
All right, Gene, I want to look at what...
Let me jump in real quick. Adolfo, I wouldn't bet on Trump's intellect for much of anything, but you go ahead.
He can put together a sentence, though, Douglas. He can put together a sentence. Your guy mixes it up. Remember the war with Iraq? It's the war with Ukraine. Imagine if this were Donald Trump, what you would be saying.
Okay, I want to get back to Gene in the studio. Gene, another development, and this came about just over the past 24 hours. Yeah. Republicans are now talking about the I word, impeachment of President Biden. Right. What is the case they would have against him?
Well, here's the thing. I call this Benghazi 2. Remember Kevin McCarthy said we're having these Benghazi hearings because it affects Hillary's numbers. The only reason they're doing this, if they have Benghazi 2, these bereavement hearings, impeachment hearings, it's going to affect the poll numbers to the detriment of Joe Biden. I think they're spinning their wheels, but for the Republican base and maybe for a few independents, it's going to put a little cloud over Joe Biden. But I think it's a bad political move in the end. I don't think the American people want an impeachment inquiry on something that's so speculative. When you impeach Trump, he had the perfect call, which wasn't perfect, and then you had January 6th. Those were big deals. Those were big deals.
Okay, you say speculative, but isn't that the point of the impeachment?
Well, to start an impeachment inquiry, you need some concrete evidence that something happened. They're putting the cart before the horse. They're having an impeachment hearing based on speculation. And as a prosecutor, you can speculate all you want, but that's not going to prove anything in front of a jury, which would be the American public.
Right. Joseph, the Republican Party, well, we just heard Gene tell us about the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. He says what the impeachment would do, it would give the House of Representatives wide-ranging powers to investigate the president and his financial affairs, both as president and previously as vice president. We've heard tax department whistleblowers in testimony in Congress telling us that senior officials instructed them to look the other way. Could this be a problem for the president?
It could be, in terms of, like your previous guest just said, in terms of bad publicity, a couple of bad news cycles. I mean, look, we don't really know how badly Benghazi damaged Hillary Clinton. We do know, however, that the whole email server thing had an impact on her poll numbers to the point where she was a far weaker candidate than she might have been. We're talking politics here mainly because it seems as though in this particular instance, now I don't know all the facts, I'm not a prosecutor, so all I know is what I'm informed about. It seems as though this is probably pretty thin gruel. That being said, you don't need very much of it to serve a meal to hungry Republicans and to independents who might be kind of skeptical about where this goes.
Okay, Adolfo, I want to get to the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. He's also in the race for the Republican nomination for president. He's stirred a lot of anger and a lot of controversy with some statements he's been making recently, particularly on a statement where he said that black people benefited from slavery. And this was the response by the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who herself is half black. Let's listen.
They want to replace history with lies. Adults know what slavery really involved. It involved rape. It involved torture. It involved taking a baby from their mother. It involved some of the worst examples of depriving people of humanity in our world.
So, Adolfo, is DeSantis actually digging his own grave here, his political grave?
Absolutely not. First of all, either the vice president is ignorant, which I wouldn't be surprised, or is lying, one of the two. This is a 216-page document, if anybody's taken the time to read it, that is the curriculum outline on these issues. Of that, one sentence, which is an accurate sentence, said that despite all the horrors of slavery, which is the thrust of this document, there's one sentence that says those people that were enslaved, that while they were enslaved, were given some skills to learn because it was a benefit to their enslavers, that they eventually benefited from that, including reading, Booker Washington, and the rest of it. obviously that is a true statement. That does not mean slavery was positive, or there were benefits there were benefits of slavery. But more importantly, you asked me about Governor DeSantis digging his own grave. This was put together by scholars, including leading black scholars, that put this together, this document. This was not Governor DeSantis's document. He didn't write this.
But he appointed the people on that committee, however. He appointed the people who created that document.
The idea that you cannot say that because people were enslaved during slavery, they learned a skill.
It's minimizing one of the worst horrors of the United States that has ever been committed in the United States, and to assume that this makes it all better just ignores.
Who said it makes it better? Have you read the document?
Term intended, whitewashes a lot of the horrors and relieves a lot of guilt from people who should know better, that this is history, this is fact. And never mind the fact, even if some enslaved people did learn skills, they were still subject to dehumanization. They were still subject to Jim Crow laws, that some of whom are still resonating today. So I think it's a fallacy. I think it's a dodge. I think it's one of the most insulting academic things that I've ever heard or read in my entire life.
Well, a couple of things. Jim Crow laws are no longer in the United States, but let me say something about what you just said. First of all, you just admitted that some people learned slavery.
About people who did not
let me finish. If you read that document in its totality, you cannot tell me that that document is not a damning statement on slavery. That is what's being taught.
Okay, Gene.
That was put together.
All right, let Joseph respond to that. Joseph, go ahead very quickly, please. I'm running out of time. Joe, go ahead.
A document is pure trash. Adolfo's not going to let me speak, but
okay, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead.
So, I think I've read the document. It's pure garbage. This one sentence is highlighted, surrounded by a bunch of other bunk. I think that he knew what he was doing. He appointed these people. He may not have written the document himself. He appointed those people, and he signed off on it. He knew, Governor Anti-Woke knew what he was doing.
Okay.
I commend all your readers to read the document. Tell me
Adolfo,
that it's bunk.
we are running out of time. In fact, we have run out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global business, only on CGTN.